So, hi, my name is Kirk. I'm your host today, and I have my friend Gordon. Gordon, we're getting to know each other pretty good. What led me to reach out to you originally is, how do you carve out money in your household, and if you do the right things with it, meaning invest it, what could be the value of that to where people get financial freedom? So you and I did. We did that topic. We invited the West Point guys in, talk about how to do that. So that was our first podcast. And then it led to you and I were sharing stories, and I shared a story about Stephen. Stephen, the business owner, did the work and he's getting the big check, and it was interesting to me because he's getting a pretty big check, and total despair. He's like, what do I do? Like his identity was so much into the business, his time, his relationships. He literally didn't know what that second mountain looked like. So it was despair, and I listen. I think about these things, and I've started to realize that our growth CFOs in their business building, we do a really good job at getting them to the financial freedom along the way with good household income, and then that second paycheck where they're really free, freedom of time and money. I started to realize, well, wow, I'm kind of we're kind of leaving them off at the door, like, hey, there's your $40 million, good luck kind of stuff. And I started to think about, man, it's malpractice. And so when we were talking, you actually have some thoughts about that. You created a model, how do you have meaning beyond money? And that's the topic for today. So I think a good place for us to start is a little bit about your background. How did you get to the point where you understand money and then you understand meaning after money? Can you give us your background?
Yeah, sure. I've always been interested in personal finance. And I've always worked in large high-tech companies like Dell and Apple, and I've had large teams reporting to me, often younger people. And we get together for one-on-ones or groups with lunches, and one of the most common topics is money. How do you get ahead? How do you save money? And as an executive, you have some of the trappings, a boat, a cottage, whatever, and the young people want to know, how do you get there from here? So it's a really popular topic, and that was one of the drivers of originally writing Flow Cookbook, because most people just can't see their way to actually saving. The books talk about saving 10%. Most people say 10%. I don't have 10% to save. In fact, they do. So in Flow Cookbook, the whole idea was, how do you lower that expense floor, giving up exactly nothing? So that was the idea behind the book, and that really, it started a whole wave. It unlocked financial freedom for a lot of people. But then it brings us to the same point you've gotten to with a lot of your clients, Kirk, and that is, I've got the money, now what? So my core keynote is 0 to 1 million in 60 minutes, which is all about how do you accumulate that wealth easily, minimal effort, minimal sacrifice. But then once that happens, it kind of creates its own problem that people don't anticipate, and that is that this quest of building wealth and this quest of getting to financial freedom, there comes a point where you kind of get there. You've got enough to live on. The dividends can sustain you. You stop worrying about money, but it means you'll lose this core focus and core quest in your life. So how do you get meaning after that money? That's the whole idea.
Yeah, it's a huge void because so much time is those active hours. If somebody's an employee, it's that W-2 paycheck. If you're a business owner, it's getting the household income you need. And then take that out of the picture, it's like, then what, right? We kind of got a glimpse of that with COVID, where all of a sudden that people who aren't accustomed to being home together are home together. And it didn't go well for a lot of people, right? They didn't navigate their way well through that part of their journey. Maybe we start there. I mean, you got a phenomenal background, and you got kind of the first part and the second part. What are the reasons why a person might go into depression at the point of retirement or at the point they got the money where they're financially free?
I think the pattern repeats itself many, many times in life. If you speak with therapists, and I've asked them the question, when do people typically get divorced? And the answer is kind of interesting. One of the most common precursors to divorce in married couples is when they pay off the mortgage, because they spend all these years together in this big quest to pay off the mortgage. And for most people, that's one of their biggest financial mountains, is they want to get this thing paid off. They want to get this weight off their back. And then suddenly it is paid off, and it leads into this now what thing. And to your point, same thing happened during COVID. You know, everyone's home now. We're not heading off to work. We're not going out to restaurants. We're cooped up in the house, a lot of us. And it brings us to that question of now what? Or some of your, wealthy entrepreneurs that you've worked with and done a great job in helping them build all of this wealth, and now they have the wealth. Now what? So I think most of us don't have that framework for what comes into the now what. And people need a bit of structure to hang on it, because one of the things that goes away when they retire or they sell their business is structure. They don't have something that they have to do every day. They lose their social sphere, which is all the people they work with. They lose their prestige and their sense of self. I was the CEO of my restaurant supply company. Well, you're not anymore, because that company's owned by somebody else now. So how do you rebuild all that, and how do you do it in a meaningful way so that your retirement is fulfilling and joyful? So that's really the point that we're at.
Yeah, it's really something. I mean, I think there's almost a sense of scarcity, right? Like even, one of my educational background as economist, and before, the economy was defined as allocation of scarce resources, and that's really built in deep to our culture, right? You got to, if you need more, you got to work more, kind of stuff. So I could see it once that the mortgage is paid, or empty nester, once that kind of that thing that's occupying a couple, once it's removed, it's like, okay. If they don't have a now what, if they don't have the vision of their who they are individually and as a couple together, there's a void. That's despair, right? I mean, midlife, now what kind of stuff. So what? Talk us through the getting out of that rut. You described that you created a model, a framework that people could adapt for themselves. I'd be interested in, could we take that apart a bit and share that with people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the biggest one is this notion that you talked about, this kind of struggle and this climb. There's a great book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. I don't know if you've read the book or not, but the book starts off with a sentence, and his sentence is really interesting. It says, life is difficult. And he goes on to say it's a great truth. And then he says it's one of the greatest truths. Then he goes on to explain what he means. And we're kind of built for that struggle. And when the struggle goes away, then we've got a void. So really what it's about is you kind of need a new set of struggles. You need a new quest, or something that you're going to strive for that's not easily attained. And I think that quest is best enjoyed when you take it on in a number of different flavors. So that's where we can kind of get into this model that I've been talking about.
Yeah, let's do it. So I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about like struggling going forward, struggling going uphill, versus something else. So it's, I think we need it, right? The moments of growth is when there's something that's not going the way we want. At least for me, almost without exception, my biggest points of growth when I had to go out and search and collaborate with people and find a guide, read, study, think. It's been when things are not working, and it's painful enough, where the pain of figuring out the solution is less than the pain of living with something that's 6 months later it's going to be the same. So let's go tell us the next level deeper. What's the
Sure. Yeah, let's go into the first one, and I really thought about this a lot because I love playing the guitar. It's been a long time passion of mine, and my studio here doubles as creating educational content on financial wellness. The place that I guest on podcasts and where I have Zoom to talk to people who want to bring me on board as a speaker to their audiences. And so when I originally set up the studio, I got the acoustical panel and the audio gear and everything. I thought, geez, I should get a green screen because I got a bunch of guitars hanging in the background. What does that have to do with anything? And I changed my mind because almost every Zoom call, people want to talk about the guitars. They'll say, oh, my son plays the guitar, my husband plays the guitar. I've always thought about it. And one of the most common things people say to me is they say, you are so lucky that you're musically gifted and that you're able to play an instrument. And I just find that so interesting. People view it as being this static thing. You either were bestowed the musical gift or you were not bestowed the musical gift. And I think that's a long, long way from the truth. I think people are born with, different levels of natural predilection to play a musical instrument. But it's unbelievable, the neuroplasticity and how much all of us can grow. So I always reply, joking, but with a big chunk of truth. I always say I'm unencumbered by any musical gifts whatsoever. And I've worked really hard over a long period of time, and I really can't describe the joy when I pick up my guitar and I start at it, and my wife from 2 rooms away says, "Oh my goodness, that's Hotel California. That sounds great." And
Ah,
that just feels amazing because I played for years and nobody would say anything other than "that's nice." And I'd say, "Well, that's Hotel California." And they'd go, okay. So, but it really starts to change. You put in the time, you put in the effort. And what are we really talking about? We're talking about that same struggle of building a business, the same struggle of paying off the mortgage. As humans, I think we want to be climbing this mountain, and we want to have something that we're headed towards aspirationally. And one of those ones for me was to play the guitar. In fact, I wanted to stand up and play a guitar in a bar and have at least one person clap. And the day I did that, it was just this incredibly joyous occasion because, wow, I actually got there. And the beauty of music is that it goes on forever. You can pick up bluegrass, you can start finger picking, you can work on your bar chords, your 12-bar blues, it just keeps going and going. You never scale the mountain. And the same thing is true of art. People who take up painting, at one level you can enjoy music or enjoy art. It really turbocharges when you start getting involved in doing it. And absolutely everyone can go much farther than where they started in either of these two things. So I think having the wonder and beauty of art and music in your life somehow is important. And I say, go out on a limb, spend a few bucks, get yourself a used guitar. Pianos are pretty much free. There's no cost barrier to getting into music. There's endless lessons on the internet, and get started. And then maybe you'll have a day where some other things happen that aren't great, but you'll grab your instrument, you'll grab your flute, and you'll learn a new tune. And it's sort of buttressing your mood. It's part of a new journey.
yeah. Gordon, when you're speaking, I can imagine that that can go as far as you want. Relationships, friends, at some point, unimaginable. You might be playing in front of other people. I mean, so those passions. It could be photography, it could be art, it could be cars, whatever, bicycles, whatever you love.
Yeah.
It gets you. It's that first step. It leads to the next step. As you go on the journey, there's other people around. Whatever community makes sense to you, big or small. I mean that's in the end. I never heard. Definitely some really successful business owners, plenty of money, and I never heard in businesses that really have impact, they elevated their teams, their clients and customers. And I never once heard somebody kind of towards the end of life say, "Man, I just wish I would have done more hours in the business." It's always been about relationships, like the ones that are was a positive. I'm really glad that I had this relationship with my daughter or my son, the wife. We made it through empty nest. We made it through whatever. And then business partners even. They can become lifelong friends. I served in the military briefly. That's a big source of some of my lifelong friends because you go through something together. So I can just imagine your guitar, something like that could take a person anywhere. It's a passion.
Right.
It could take whatever kind of relationship. It's not just the guitar. It's who you interact with, like your wife saying, Hotel California. That's a beautiful moment.
It is for sure. And, I think you tied in some other really important ones. I think that friends and social world is a really big thing. And these elements that we're going to talk about, in many cases, they interact with one another. So I'll get together and play some music with a bunch of colleagues here in Cleveland, Ohio. And we're having a shared experience together. We're laughing at something, and somebody, gets off and does a solo, and somebody picks up from there. So it's this business of community. We're social animals, and I think bolstering that circle is so important because, again, it often goes away when you sell your business, you retire from the workforce, and people are busy. The people who haven't retired yet, they're still plugging away, for 50 hours a week. They probably don't have as much time for you, and you tend to get forgotten. So actively bolstering that friends and social thing is so key. And it ties in closely to two other ones. One is this, and you touched on it, this sense of family, and whatever that is, some people don't have a lot of family. Some people have family that are geographically flung apart. I've got children in 2 countries and nearly coast to coast. So it's effortful. You got to put in the time to get in the Zoom calls or the phone calls and stay caught up and help each other and share the time, make an effort to get together. And then that sense of family gives you another, and friends, gives you another whole layer of community, which is really critical. And when that fades in retirement, it's another thing that's driving us to depression. We feel isolated, we feel lonely.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's funny, in the age of social media, people have never been more lonely, and that's even thank you to the baby boomers. It brought 2 billion people out of poverty. So from a material standpoint, most people have more than they need, but they're lonely, right? And that's a source. I'm a dog lover, and I like to say we're pack animals, right? And we all have different skills and different roles in the pack, kind of stuff. The lone wolf. It might sound good to some, but boy, it's not a great place.
Well, that's it exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So talk about relationship beyond the money, even along the way. I would say to people, don't wait to find joy, right? These principles of happiness beyond the money literally start now, and then you'll see that second mountain. It'll be vivid, and when you're there, as you get the financial freedom, you're living more in that meaningful place.
I think that's the case. And, the other one that's related to what we're talking about, and you mentioned your wife a couple times, I think it's critical to love and be loved by someone. And it was interesting for me, I was married for 27 years, and, we got to a point where it just really was a loveless marriage. And, a lot of work with therapists, and I think we went for a total of 2 years, and I spent time on my own to try and understand what was going on. And I just realized, for me, it just wasn't to be. Now, for other people, what they need to do is double down and put the work in, and they need to really focus on their marriage and acts of kindness and bring themselves together and all those kinds of things. So important. Communication, so many elements. But there's other marriages that really just, you can't get there from here. And one therapist I was at, and she said to me, I'll never forget it. She looked at me, she said, "You do have a right to be happy," which is the most obvious statement anyone's ever made, but it hung on me as this powerful truth, and I hadn't even thought about my marriage in the context of being happy. I just thought, well, I've made some vows, and I'm going to keep on keeping on, because you got to keep on keeping on, and you're married, and you don't want to give up, and all those things. For some people, that's not the right answer. You do have a right to be happy, and you have more years ahead of you. So whatever it is you need to do to find a partner and love and be loved, or to double down on the marriage that you're in and really put in the effort to make it successful. And in some cases where you really can't get there from here, you need to make a change, and you need to be with someone who is able to love you, and someone you can love, and someone you can be happy with, because life's too short to not enjoy that terrific feeling of a partnership in your life. So I think that's another really critical element.
Yeah, you're getting the affection. Is that the third aspect of the model, or is that?
Yeah, well, we've talked about arts and music. We've talked about friends and social. Talked about family, which could be a basket of friends for people who don't have the family. And then this idea of the partner and loving and be loved. So that kind of gets us through, one big chunk of the pieces. I think another one is spirituality, which for some people is organized religion of whatever sort, and some people change religions to find one that's better suited for them. For other people, it's just about being outside and a walk in the woods, or, marveling at nature, but just something that's beyond the here and now and the physicality of our planet, something that connects you to something bigger. Whether you're staring at the mountains, you're marveling at the vastness of the ocean, you're scuba diving and looking at sea creatures, you're in a church or a mosque or a synagogue or whatever it is you follow, but something that connects you to something beyond the here and now. I think that's important for people.
Yeah, those are good. Yeah, not the dogmatic stuff, but really what matters. I mean, that's what I hear coming through. Wherever a person finds that, make that part of it. I think way before when you're building, your financial freedom, and then after financial freedom, make that part of the daily routine, or just be in the moment. Enjoy
It
what
could be
you're doing.
meditation. For some people, it's just meditating and, just being in their thoughts for a little bit of time without the usual consuming media and doing tasks and all those kinds of things. That's critical. And then, some of the other ones, I think, and they can be woven in together, but a cause, something that you're passionate about that's going to make a difference and typically helping others. And when you have that cause, now you're looking outside yourself. You're not so inward looking. You're thinking about helping people. And every study that's ever happened on happiness, one of the things it boils down to is helping others through some sort of a cause. And as is the case with many of these things, you could support a cause, you could give money to a soup kitchen, or you could get out there and ladle soup, which is an entirely different experience, again, where you're out there, you're seeing the people that you're helping face to face. Or, for me, it's financial wellness. It's a huge source of pain for people. I've got some content, some information, so I'm getting it out there to help people. That's one of my causes.
Yeah, I totally relate with that. Financially helping people do well in that part of their life. I feel like I was like by purpose. I was born to help people gain financial freedom on their terms. Just to bring in that story, like with Steven, where I started to realize, wow, I'm leaving people off at the curb and good luck kind of stuff. So I stayed with him, talked with him about this kind of stuff, and tapped into some other guides and sages on how to discover that second mountain. And he's gone from literally despair. He literally said, he getting a big check, bigger than most that we see. He said that was more difficult, more painful than his divorce. And I can imagine that his divorce was pretty painful the way he describes it. And then he talk about his interests, his passions, and where he's coming into, like literally now, like he's a few months into it. He wants to build a place where young men, through boxing, he can mentor and develop young men, because that was an early life experience of his that was formative. Right? He ended up being an engineer and doing a remarkable thing in his company. But that was a starting point for him that was formative and something he's passionate about. And wow, now he's healthy. He's at a really good age, and he has 2 sons of his own, and he has the money. He can literally pretty much build whatever he wants to build, and do it the way, using his best imagination, best creativity to do it. So that's purpose. Can you imagine how many dozens or hundreds of young men that he could help by just doing that? The story is still being written, but I'm so interested. I can't even tell you.
Well, what has he done, really? He's built himself a new set of struggles, a new set of challenges. He's built something aspirational. He wants to make a difference with people. It's also social. It gives him a role. It gives him a cause, and it gives him a sense of meaning. So I can see where that's completely turned around his life, and it's really following the kinds of steps that we're talking about. It really leads us into another one, which is this idea of physicality. And, there's so many things that we can do as humans. And, I find through music, it's incredible how you can stretch your brain in all kinds of different dimensions. The dexterity of your fingers, things that just feel impossible, chords that you can't possibly reach. Suddenly they became reachable, then you're ready for the next thing. And the same thing happens with our physicality. Somebody said to me when I think it was in my early 20s, they said, geez, you should go and run the New York City Marathon. And that just seemed like the most preposterous thing, because I just wasn't a runner. I would be, I could maybe run a half a mile. My body's just not meant for running. And I had all these beliefs, this dogma about this aspect of physicality. I used to do some bike riding and racing, but I'm not a runner. Anyway, I stayed at it because, that challenge got thrown at me, and I thought, well, all right, I'm going to do it. And you can get in by lottery. So I sent in my application, and I started running. And then, it took a long time to be able to run, say, 3 miles on my own. And then I got that under my belt, and I just kept going, and I signed up. And now that I signed up, I had to run 26 miles, 385 yards. There's no getting out of it now. I told everyone I was going to do it. And often I did it. And so I went from a non-runner, and believe me, I am the last pick for the basketball team guy. anything that you want to set your mind to, literally you can do it. If you run a half a mile and you're in, reasonable shape, you don't have any kind of disabilities, but even then, you see people running marathons who are blind, who, need guides, who have every kind of disability you can imagine. Our physicality, like everything else, can stretch much, much farther than we think it can. And what is that? It's another struggle. It's another mountain to climb. And from that effort and from that achievement comes that sense of joy and fulfillment. So really what we're talking about is we're talking about this effort and this stretch in every possible direction of your life, because as humans, our abilities are literally limitless. And most people kind of run in this tiny wedge. They don't play music because they think they're not musical. They don't run a marathon because they think they're not able to do it. They don't start a business because what if they fail? And so they live in this tiny box. And when you're retired, and assume you've got a little bit of financial resources, well, you're unshackled from all that. Now is the time. So set goals in each of these areas, and let's get them going.
Yeah. Well, let's highlight one of the core things. At the beginning of each of those threads, there was a belief. There's a belief, I'm not a runner, and you change your self-identity to, I can do a marathon.
Yep.
Right? And you had examples of other people, like there's the blind guy who climbed the mountain, Mount Everest, right? I mean, Jesus, right? That's something. And so it started with becoming aware of an unconscious belief, or it could be conscious or unconscious. You chose to challenge that belief, and then you opened up an entire new vector for you that you can just like a guitar, you can go as far as you want with it. You can create relationships around it. You can enjoy your family. You can create a purpose, right, where you're helping other people gain self-confidence by being on the stage, playing music, just taking extreme things. Gordon, that's a beautiful thing where you, at a certain point, certain beliefs became out. You want to be loved in your marriage, right? That was important to you, not just be committed. So that took you into the second thing. I think that's really important. I hear beliefs. Like my wife is Venezuelan, and most of her family members are still in Venezuela, and they had opportunities to make something in the United States, and they have beliefs on what's holding them there, and what's there is not good, and it's a survival at best. Where no matter how hard they swim, survival at best.
Well, I think this key point of beliefs and these limiting beliefs. It's incredible how they hold us back. When you were talking about that, it reminded me of an interesting story years ago when I was doing all kinds of running and half marathons, 10Ks, and all this sort of thing. And I tried to get in my morning run, which was typically about 5 kilometers, 3 miles. And one day I thought, geez, I got to get a bunch of checks in the bank, and then I had to get to work. And how do I, do my little bit of banking and get my run in? So I put on one of those little fanny packs to go running. I had all my banking card and my checks and everything. So I ran to the bank, went to the ATM, and deposited my checks, did my banking, whatever. Then I set out for my run, combining two things at once so I could make it to my early morning meeting. So I went for my run, and at the time I was living right on the shore of Lake Ontario. There was a big boardwalk, so I used to run on this beautiful boardwalk with the lake right beside me, and so I'm running along, and then I listen, I think, geez, there's somebody right behind me. I hear the footsteps of another runner, and I can be a small bit competitive, so I picked up the pace a little bit, and I was kind of smiling to myself. There's just no way this guy's getting by me. It's not going to happen. And what was going to be a leisurely run, I started picking up the pace. And as I picked up the pace, I heard his footfalls, right stride for stride with me. He was still right behind me. I thought, oh, okay, you want to play, And so I start to drop the hammer a little bit, and I'm really breathing, and I'm really pushing it. And, I'm running along, and I see the end of this boardwalk's about a mile up ahead in the distance. And I'm really hauling now, and those footfalls are right behind me. He is not letting go, and I thought there's just no way he's going to pass me between now and the end. So I just keep going and going. I'm going harder and harder, and I can feel my heart pounding. My lungs are searing. My face are screaming at me. I'm absolutely flat out, faster than I've ever gone, and yet he's right there. He's right on me, right? So I thought, okay, I'm down to the last quarter mile. And I thought, okay, what I'm going to do when we get to the end, I'm going to turn around, give him a high five, and have a big laugh because, we're both playing this game, this stranger. Anyway, we get to the end, and I'm in a flat out sprint, and I get to the end of the boardwalk, and I'm kind of smiling. I'm dying with cardiovascularly, but I'm smiling. I turn around ready to give him a high five. There was nobody there. And then I realized it was this little fanny pack that I was wearing, and it was making this noise as I
Oh my
ran.
God.
And I thought it was somebody else. But it goes back to your point about headspace, because I ran faster and I trained harder than I ever even would have thought possible. I didn't think I could keep going at that pace and at that level. Meanwhile, what's happening, I'm pushing myself, and I just had a great laugh all by myself at the end of this boardwalk.
High five.
So anyway, we're just limited by our minds. We think so much about, I'm not a runner, I'm not a musician, I can't do this, I can't do that. And in fact, there's very little that we can't do. Almost any kind of obstacle we can overcome, and that's where the real joy comes, particularly if we're pushing, as your friend does, Steve does, to help young men with this program. He probably hasn't organized something like this before. He probably thought he couldn't do it, and now he's out there, he's making a difference. He's pushing himself in a way he never thought he could.
Yeah. Yeah, that starts. Okay, there's another from your story. It highlights what we do, what matters to us, is not relative to what somebody else is doing in their life. Whatever gives meaning to them, that's their life, their journey, different from everyone else. And so it's really about based in alignment with that guiding light, that guiding star of what we care about, what a person cares about, is are we one step further along than we were yesterday in that direction based on what we care about, without regard to what other people are doing. They got their life, they got freedom, right? They got to do their thing. And so I think that's when people have the chance to really find joy. And I do, even from back in the day when I was in the Army, I was a behavioral scientist. I literally built and sold a business, went to the Army to serve during the first Gulf War. Behavioral scientist was a good field for me. I really could tune into people. And I came to the observation or conclusion that there is organic depression where the brain chemicals just aren't lined up and they need some help. Outside of that, most of it's behavioral, where it's somebody is literally thinking about themselves so much, where just think, how am I comparing to other people and this and that and my sister and brother, and they're literally reinforcing that thinking process, the neural circuits that put them into a place of eventually hopelessness. For a lot of people, the minute they become externally focused, like how can I help Mary, how can I help Tom, how can I do this kind of stuff, they start to come out of it, right? And because they're not self-absorbed. And even, you remember Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, Auschwitz kind of stuff. I mean, I can't imagine too many things more. Like you don't control your life anymore, right? Somebody's at a twitch of a finger, you live, you die. Definitely not enough resources, pure scarcity, and he found his way through by serving other people in Auschwitz, right? Which is, and I always wonder, like, man, I don't think I have it in me to rise to that level under those conditions. I would like to think, I would do it, but probably wouldn't. But nevertheless, for all of us in relatively normal circumstances, if you choose your move, start focusing on team members. Who can you help? Who can you help? And that can lead to joy. As long as it's in the vector of your guiding light. That space that you really care about. Like you love guitars, but if somebody else didn't love that genre, they should find their own, right? That they can get into. So really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's could most of us do what Viktor Frankl did? I think a lot of us would crumble in that kind of a situation, the utter hopelessness of it. And yet he did. And so could most of us do what he did? Well, maybe not. Maybe some of us could. But maybe most of us couldn't. But we probably could start a charity. We could probably run a mile. We could probably learn to play 3 chords on the guitar, which opens up thousands of songs. There's lots of things that we can do. And when you think about this whole social media rut, where people get in ruts about, consumerism, they want to acquire something and they get a little, dopamine bump when they buy a thing on Amazon. And of course, that falls back down even lower when the credit card bill comes in. They don't have the money for it. So people get stuck in that loop, or they get stuck in the social media loop. And when you spend a little time on social media, everyone you know is in Costa Rica and they're driving their new car, and oh, here I am on my boat, here I am with 3 more cocktails. It's not reality. I mean, people don't put on social media when they get bad test results from their doctor. They don't put on social media when they're sitting at home all alone on a Friday night with nothing to do. That doesn't end up on social media, so they get in that loop. But when my lungs were searing, when I was running neck and neck with my imaginary running friend, I had no space up here for anything else. I was just on this quest, and it felt terrific. When I'm trying to learn a new song on guitar, I can't think about my neighbor who just got a fancier car than mine. That's all gone. I'm lost in my moment, or if I'm meditating, or I'm helping other people. I'm on a stage helping people with their financial wellness. There's no time, and nor should there be, because we can all do a whole lot more. Maybe not to the point of Viktor Frankl, but there's more that we can do on our quest through these struggles to learn something about ourselves and to help other people.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, it sounded like you were right there. As your example, when you were running against yourself, you were right there in the moment. There was no, you weren't thinking about the past. You're not thinking about the future that hasn't happened. It was just footsteps and awareness of the pounding heart.
That's what I had, and it's funny. There was another running story that I can share that was another one that gave me a ton of meaning. And what had happened was in 1992, I ran the New York City Marathon, and we talked about that earlier, and so that day finally came. And, 30,000 people in this huge thing, and I just felt incredibly heroic running this thing, and there was this self-focus in doing it because there'd been months and months of training and all kinds of setbacks and injuries. Anyone who's done a marathon can tell you the similar stories. But the real meaning came at about mile 22 out of 26 miles. That's a long way to run, I can tell you. I got to mile 22 and I saw these runners up in the distance. I thought, what are they doing? And it looks like they're holding hands as they're running. And I thought, well, are they couples? What's going on? I get closer up and they had these jackets and shirts on that said Achilles Track Club. And then it dawned on me they were guiding blind runners.
Wow.
And in an instant, I went from this, heroic day, look at me, I'm running a marathon, and oh my goodness, how great am I, look how hard I've worked, and it all just faded away. And I just kept thinking about these blind runners as I went by them. And you don't really think about it, but when you're blind, you can't see the terrain. You don't know if there's a pothole. You're completely trusting this other person. You have to ask them the time and the distance and your pace, and you can't see the milestones ahead. It's all put on your guide. And I thought, wow, those blind runners are really the heroes. Here I am nothing. Millions and millions of people have run a marathon. And it really changed my perception, but not the end of the story. So anyway, I finished the marathon, and all I could think about was these tremendous, disabled runners, visually disabled. And I thought about that story a lot, and then probably about 8 years later, I'd signed up. I was running the Toronto Half Marathon. I picked up my race kit, and I saw a booth for the Achilles Track Club, and I remembered these blind runners, and that's the group that was guiding these runners. So I went up to the booth, and I said to the woman there, I said, I have to say, what you're doing is really incredible. Like, thank you on behalf of everyone for the great work you're doing. And she looked at me, and she looked at my race kit in my hand with my race number, and she said, would you like to guide a blind runner? And I thought to myself, you know what? This is my own little time. This is my personal time away from my kids. I'm on my own. I'm doing these runs. It's kind of my thing, a little bit selfish. And I looked her right in the eye and I said, yes, I would. And she said, okay, we'll call you if we have someone. So it was out of my mind. A couple weeks later, I got a call and they said, hey, we talked about you guiding a blind runner. I said, yes. They said, well, we've got somebody who runs about your pace. You still up for guiding? And I said, yes, I will. And they said, there's a bit of a catch. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, he's Russian. I said, well, I don't care where he's from. That's fine. They said, well, he doesn't speak any English. And I said, well, that's fine. Like, I'll figure it out. I'll guide him. So we got all the arrangements and everything. I hung up the phone. I thought, how is this going to work? And I'm not great hearing. I'm a little hearing impaired. I speak no Russian. He can't see. Like, how is this even going to work? So I called a friend of mine who actually is fluent in Russian. And I said, Eugene, can you send me these phrases in Russian phonetically? So I practiced up my Russian phrases. There's careful, there's a pothole, come with me left, come with me right, let's speed up, we're behind pace. So I memorized all these phrases in my Russian. And so the day comes and I meet the Achilles Track Club officials, and they've got this gentleman. And so what happens is he holds onto my wrist. You don't hold their wrist, he holds your wrist. And we start off running. And I'm yapping away at him in Russian, come left, come right, here's our pace and all this stuff. And it seems like he doesn't know what I'm talking about. And I said to him after probably a mile, I said, do you speak English? He said, of course, speak English, yes. I said, I thought you were Russian. He goes, Bulgarian. So he's this Bulgarian guy who speaks English. And I'm just going, oh man, I memorized all this Russian. So we're running together. And he's asking me about the pace and the time and, minutes per mile and where are we. So this thing goes on, and I'm sort of seeing the race, the way he feels the race. And then I'm reading off the miles. It's 13.1 miles. We get to 13 miles. He says, can you tell me when we're about 200 yards from the finish? And I said, sure. So I said, okay, we're about 300 yards now, maybe 250. He goes, describe it for me. And he could just see the barest shadows and light. And I said, well, there's a bit of a rise to it. It's straight ahead. There's no hazards. There's no holes. And he says, how far now? I said, about 200 yards. And he let go of my hand.
Wow.
And he ran for everything he was worth. And I thought, oh, goodness, he's my responsibility. Like, what if he trips and he falls? I was supposed to be looking after him. So I took off, and I'm running as hard as I can. He was just that much faster than me. I couldn't hold him. And he just sprinted, and it was just the joy of being able to run unguided. That was the most important thing to the world, to him. I finally caught up to him at the finish line, and I realized, it goes back to your Viktor Frankl, it's unlimited what we can do. There's unlimited heroism out there, and I wasn't the hero. It was this gentleman who's running pretty much blind, and he just wanted the joy of doing something we all can do. We can all run. And most of us are sighted, and we don't have his disability. He's out there doing it. He always has to run with someone other than his 200 yards.
Yeah. Okay, Gordon, do you mind if I highlight a few things from that story, and
sure.
you can tell me
if
you took something different out of it? Okay. So the first thing that really jumped out is the power of a guide, right? The right person, the right time, the right sage. Like the self-made person thing, really? Yeah, right? Versus somebody who's looking for the right group, the right guide. It's going to be a different outcome, right? More clarity, more confidence. And then the other thing is, both of you, we talk about the structure, but both of you left your comfort zone into the growth zone. You didn't get yourself into the overwhelm zone, like you weren't doing something that was going to set you backwards, but you left the comfort zone, got in the growth zone, and then through his guide, you got him to a certain point, then he was able to fly. I mean, he was able to do something he always wanted to do, right? And just open his heart up, be in the moment, and go. And so how all that comes together, and that's a lifetime experience, I think, I would imagine, for you, for him. I mean, what did you take away from that experience? I can feel it. It feels just, I can feel like the joy. It's just amazing. Like, here we are, and you're almost like the Wright brothers launching their plane into the air, kind of stuff. Yeah. What did you feel at that moment?
Well, you know what? I mean, you nailed it. It's that story has so many things in it. There's this mentorship thing, and there's this idea that we all stand on the backs of others. And to your point about the self-made man, I think is a really great point. Don't know that there's such a thing, because there's so many people we've learned from, and there's so many people that we give things to. And of all the races I've run, and pretty much everything I've ever done athletically, that moment where he just let go of my hand. I can't describe, nothing has been as emotional for me. And I've told the story all kinds of times on stages. And it's probably in the last year I can tell the story without welling up in tears because it was just such a momentous thing. I learned so many things that day about what actually is important. And there isn't this individual heroism, it's the heroism of how can you help others to set flight. I worked in a company for a lot of years, heading up a sales team, and across the other executives, I always used to say, let's build the heroes, let's not be the heroes. So if there's a big sales presentation, one of us as executives, we could probably go out and make sure we won it. But that's the short game. The longer game is we want to build this team so they can do things they never before thought possible. One is we're going to get leverage. We're going to grow the business faster. If we can build these heroes, we should be a hero factory in that company, not trying to, show that as gray hairs, we still have the ability to win a deal. And what happens is, the company's going to grow faster, but all of these individuals are going to get to places they didn't even think was possible. We're launching 1,000 dreams as we do that. And that's kind of the beauty of the business, and it ties back to that marathon story.
That's beautiful. And one of the outcomes in business is there's at least an opportunity for that transformative growth of the business owner and all their team members. And then there's a ripple effect, right? You got the team members healthy, confident, they're confident, they have job security. They got to earn it, right? Nothing is coming from the government or whatever else. But you can see this ripple effect into their families, into their friends, right? If they have children, they're able to guide their children in a different way. I think that's the way we get to a healthier place. Where it's starting with you in this story, literally putting it all out there for somebody else. You saw something you admired. Then it came up again in your environment, and you took the time out of your day to go say, hey, I really respect what you do. And, and you took a leap of faith, because I could imagine a lot of runners with just the idea of having somebody who can't see running next to them, crossing potholes and branches or whatever. I mean, there's some risk with that. There'd be no reason to say no thank you.
Yeah, and just on the practical end, studies have shown that without vision, we have almost no ability to run in a straight line. So, he was defying kind of the laws of where we're going. We're literally walking circles. There was a Mythbusters episode on this, and they had people out in the field blindfold, and they lined them up, and they said, here's where you're going, put the blindfold on. They're literally going. So the fact that this guy was able to keep going straight for even a couple hundred yards was a bit of a miracle. I guess he had just enough shadows and light that he probably could see, which is why he wanted the description to make it easier for him. But, there's a multiplicative effect that you touched on there that's very important because, my kids know that story very well. And so that informs what they're thinking about their own possibilities, because I'm talking about a guy who's blind, who's running free. Well, that says to them, everything is possible. It says our job is to help and launch other people's missions. And so they lived and they heard that. I don't know how many people on the sidelines were watching that moment where it was very clear I was running with a visually disabled runner, and they saw him let go. And I'm sure people were gasping because they realized, oh my goodness, and they saw me struggling to keep up with them, despite the fact that I'm sighted. There's so many lessons and so many angles, and so many people benefited from that day, from the heroism of this young man.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing, right? That's the human journey. Is there in your approach, some really good stuff. Is there anything else in that, as far as your journey, what you learned? Is there anything else in your 6 steps that you want to highlight?
I really think those are the big ones, but I think a central part is learning. This notion of continuous learning. It's so important. A lot of people view that their learning is their college training or whatever it may be, but learning itself is another one of these struggles, and it kind of runs across everything else that we're talking about, this joy of learning, and suddenly you unpack something that you've struggled with, whether it's a math problem that you're trying to solve, and holy cow, there it is. a technology problem. We can't, how do you get the mouse to, here's the problem on my screen. You unlock it, there's this feeling of elation, particularly if you did some struggling on it. So this
Yeah.
business of understanding that physically we can just keep going and going. There's more and more and more we can do way beyond what we thought is possible. And certainly the same thing is true mentally across all of these things, and that struggle is okay. Go back to Scott Peck, life is difficult, and that's
Yeah.
okay because that's how it's supposed to be. And the struggle physically and the struggle learning, that's where the joy of life comes from. And I, urge all of your listeners to really take up all of those possibilities and see how far they can take it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to leave it where it's the discovery. What a great journey. I mean, you're living, moments you're stuck, setbacks, but you're living what you talked about. You learn things from it, and so Gordon, I admire you and appreciate you that you're doing what you can to get the message out. And sometimes it's remarkable. You never know what conversation, or what experience you're sharing that 3 years later somebody comes to you and says, "Wow, when you said this, I started." The minute people start believing different, and they can see that themselves differently, then at that point, the physicality, things really, the limits we have are pretty much the limits we're keeping on ourselves, right? And financial, what role we have in our life, whether we're building a business or we're on the second mountain, what role we have. Gordon, I really appreciate you, man.
Oh, listen, really, again, always great to chat with you, Kirk. I love what you're doing to help people, and love working with you.
Yeah, we'll keep it going. The more we're getting to know each other pretty well. So for the audience, thank you for your time and attention. If you found something really remarkable that's useful, let me know. I'll share it with Gordon. I'll share your story with other people if you got a great story. But thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks so much, Kirk.